The wind had a way of carrying secrets through the valley, soft whispers of danger that only the desperate seemed able to hear. That night, when the cold pressed hardest against the forgotten edges of town, a stranger staggered toward a farmhouse with the look of someone who had outrun more than just the darkness. Evan Rourke had nursed broken men before, but he had never seen a woman collapse onto his porch, mud-soaked, trembling uncontrollably, while gasping the last words he ever expected to hear. "Please, don't let them take me back." Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, emotional stories like this one. Your support helps us keep bringing these narratives to life. Evan Rourke lived alone on the outer rim of Wexler County, a stretch of land more familiar with storms than strangers. His farm was small, quiet, and rarely visited, just how he liked it. But the night the woman stumbled onto his porch, everything familiar shattered. She was young, maybe mid-20s, her breath ragged, her clothes torn as if she'd sprinted through bramble and barbed wire alike. Evan froze only for a moment before instinct took over. He lifted her carefully, feeling the way her body shook, as though fear itself lived beneath her skin. "Hey," he whispered, "you're safe. Just breathe." But her eyes, wide and clouded with panic, told him she didn't believe safety was possible. As he carried her inside, Evan felt something he hadn't felt in years, a sense that trouble wasn't just near, it had chosen him. And somewhere in the distance, he thought he heard engines, slow, searching, patient. Whoever she was running from, they weren't far behind. He laid her on the old leather sofa beside the wood stove and wrapped her in a blanket. For a moment, her breathing steadied, but her gaze darted around the room as if mapping every escape route. "What's your name?" Evan asked softly. She hesitated, then whispered, "Lyra." No last name, no explanation. Just that, Lyra, a name that sounded foreign to the land around them. She tried to sit up, but a sharp wince carved across her face. "Easy," Evan said, kneeling beside her. "You're hurt." She shook her head. "Pain's not the problem." Her voice quivered, thin but determined. "They're looking for me, and they don't stop." Evan's jaw tightened. He didn't ask who they were. He could see the terror etched clear as frost across her expression. He had seen fear in people before, but this was different. This was someone who had lived too long as prey. Outside, the wind shifted, rattling the windows like impatient fingers. Lyra flinched at the sound, her hand gripping his sleeve with surprising strength. Whatever nightmare she had fled, it was close enough that even the night seemed uneasy. Evan brewed tea in silence, listening to the faint crackle of the stove and the woman's uneven breaths. He didn't push her for answers. He learned long ago that people only speak when the weight inside them becomes too heavy to hold. Eventually, she whispered, "I wasn't supposed to survive." The words chilled him more than the winter wind. She stared into the flames, as though seeing something far beyond the room. "I worked a research compound outside Briarstead, just cleaning, nothing important. But one night, I overheard something. Something I shouldn't have." Evan's pulse tightened. "And they came after you?" She nodded once, slow and resigned. "They said no one could know. They said accidents happen in the woods." Her voice cracked. "I ran before they could make me disappear." Evan clenched his jaw. Wexler County had always been shadowed by rumors. Private industries, closed-off facilities, people who vanished without explanation. But hearing it from someone trembling on a sofa made those rumors feel real, sharp, and close. He set the tea in her hands gently. "You're safe here," he promised. But even as he said it, he wasn't sure it was true. The night deepened, settling around the farmhouse like heavy cloth. Lyra sipped the tea with trembling fingers, her eyes scanning the dark corners of the room as though expecting them to move. "Why come here?" Evan asked. She swallowed hard. "Your house was the only light I saw." Something in the way she said it, quiet, almost reverent, tightened something in Evan's chest. He had spent so long believing his solitude made him invisible. Yet this woman, hunted and terrified, had found him like a beacon. Suddenly, headlights swept across his frosted window. Lyra stiffened. Evan stood slowly, the way one does when a nightmare comes true. A vehicle rolled along the dirt road outside, moving slow enough to be deliberate. "Is that them?" Evan whispered. Lyra didn't answer. Her silence was answer enough. Evan reached for his coat and stepped toward the door, his hand hovering near the old rifle mounted on the wall. Not to use it, just to remind himself he wasn't helpless. Outside, the engine idled, low and predatory. Whoever these people were, they weren't hiding their presence. They wanted to be seen. They wanted fear to walk through the door before they did. Evan returned to Lyra, his mind racing. "Listen," he whispered. "If they come here, we don't answer. I'll keep the lights low. They'll assume no one's home." Lyra swallowed, nodding weakly. "They don't assume," she whispered. "They know." The words landed like cold iron in his stomach. Evan took a breath, steadying himself. "Who are they?" For the first time, real tears welled in her eyes. People with money. Power. Enough of both to bury anyone who gets in their way. Evan felt a familiar anger simmer beneath his ribs. An anger he thought he'd buried years ago after watching his own brother's disappearance go unexplained. "Then they've come to the wrong house," he said quietly. But as he spoke, the vehicle outside shut off its engine. Silence poured into the room like water filling a cave. Lyra's fingers dug into the blanket, knuckles white. Evan stood beside the window, watching shadows move near the tree line. Trouble had found his doorstep before, but never like this. Not with someone else's life hanging by a thread. And certainly not with the feeling that this was only the beginning of something far larger than either of them could see. The silence outside pressed against the farmhouse like a living thing, heavy and watchful. Evan stood motionless beside the window, his breath shallow as he studied the faint silhouettes shifting near the tree line. Whoever they were, they moved with practiced precision, too quiet, too measured, too intentional to be lost travelers. Lyra curled deeper into the sofa, clutching the blanket as though it were armor. Evan felt a sharp surge of protectiveness rise in him, unexpected and fierce. He had spent years avoiding other people's troubles, living quietly, repairing fences and tending fields, asking nothing of the world and expecting nothing in return. But now trouble had chosen him anyway, walking right up his driveway in the dead of night. A faint metallic click echoed through the stillness. Someone outside opening a car door. Evan drew a slow breath, forcing himself to remain calm. "Don't move," he whispered to Lyra. "Don't even breathe loud." His voice was steady, but inside he felt old wounds stirring. Memories of unanswered knockings, missing person reports, and officials who shrugged with hollow smiles. This time, he swore silently he wouldn't let shadows take another life. A knock came, sharp, firm, deliberate. Not the unsure tap of someone seeking help, but the commanding knock of someone who believed the door already belonged to them. Evan's pulse drummed in his ears. "Stay here," he whispered to Lyra, though she could no longer speak. Fear had sealed her throat. He stepped toward the entryway, stopping just short of touching the handle. "Who is it?" he called, keeping his voice gruff, bored, like a man half asleep and irritated. A smooth voice answered, "Evening, sir. Apologies for the late hour. We're searching for a young woman who may have wandered onto your property. Have you seen anyone?" Evan's skin crawled. The voice was polite, the kind of polite that hid a sharpened edge beneath every calm syllable. "No one comes out here," Evan replied. "You're wasting your time." A brief silence followed, as if the stranger outside were smiling. "Mind if we take a look around?" The question was not a question. It was authority disguised as courtesy, and Evan recognized the tactic instantly. He stepped back, heart pounding, knowing what he had to say next could decide everything. "No," he said firmly. "Private property." The words tasted like iron in his mouth. Outside, the night seemed tense. The stranger exhaled softly, a subtle shift in tone that made the hairs on Evan's neck rise. "Of course," the voice replied. "We understand." But something in that response felt wrong. Too easy, too accepting. Lyra's eyes widened, silently pleading for reassurance he couldn't give. Evan retreated from the door, moving to the window, just in time to see the men outside step away, but not leave. Instead, They scattered around the property like wolves circling prey. One shone a flashlight across the barn. Another traced the edges of the field with deliberate sweeps. These were not men who respected boundaries. These were men who believed boundaries existed only for other people. Evan clenched his fists, frustration burning through him. He was a simple man. No weapons beyond an old hunting rifle. No security cameras. No allies nearby. But he had something the strangers didn't expect. Resolve. And a growing fury. "They're not going away," he murmured. Lyra nodded, tears streaking down her cheeks. "They never do," she whispered. He knelt beside her again, lowering his voice to a whisper. "Tell me exactly what you overheard. Not the whole story, just enough for me to know what we're dealing with." Lyra wiped her cheeks with trembling fingers. "It was a meeting. Late. I was supposed to have gone home already, but I stayed to finish cleaning. They didn't know I was still in the building." Her voice shook. "There was a man, Mr. Callan. He runs the entire compound. He said they were moving forward with something they weren't legally allowed to test. Something that could wipe out anyone who spoke of it." She swallowed hard. And then another man asked what they should do about the workers who knew too much. Callan said, "Accidents happen on rural roads all the time." Evan felt his stomach twist. These weren't just powerful men. They were men who believed consequences were optional. He looked toward the window again, watching their shadows slide across the yard like stains spreading in cold water. "You shouldn't have survived," he whispered. Lyra nodded. "That's what they told me when they caught me the first time." Evan froze. The first time, Lyra looked up, her eyes glassy with trauma. "I escaped tonight, but they had me for 3 days before this. They kept saying I'd signed something, confess something they could use to bury me legally." Evan felt his breath catch. 3 days. 3 days of being held by men who had no limits. She continued, voice thin as thread. "They drugged me, moved me. At one point, I woke up in a shipping container. I only made it out because one of the guards argued with another, and they left the door unlatched." Before Evan could respond, a sudden crash outside made them both jolt. A metal bucket in the barn had been knocked over. Footsteps followed, slow, heavy, certain. The men weren't pretending anymore. They were searching, actively, aggressively, coming closer. Evan's heartbeat thundered. He grabbed the lantern, extinguished it, and the room fell into darkness. Lyra clutched his sleeve, her entire body trembling. "What do we do?" she whispered. Evan didn't answer immediately. He looked toward the hallway leading to the cellar, an old storm shelter built by his father decades ago. "We hide," he said finally, "and if they come inside, we pray the dark keeps us invisible." The cellar air wrapped around them like a cold fist, damp and metallic, carrying the faint scent of soil and rusted iron. Evan eased the wooden hatch shut above their heads, sealing them in darkness, so complete it felt almost physical, like a thick velvet curtain pressing against their skin. Lyra's breathing was shallow, uneven. Evan crouched beside her, straining to listen beyond the pounding of his own pulse. The footsteps overhead were unmistakable now, slow, determined, scraping over the old wood floors he'd walked 1,000 times without fear. Every creak, every thud, every murmured voice pierced the cellar like a warning. Dust drifted down from the beams with each heavy step, drifting through the air like falling ash. "They won't find the hatch," Evan whispered, though the words felt fragile. His father had built this cellar himself, a hidden refuge from tornadoes and the sort of trouble rural families expected. Storms, not men with polished shoes and dead eyes. But Evan couldn't shake the dread slithering through him. This wasn't weather. This wasn't nature. This was human danger, deliberate and calculated. And humans had a way of tearing through anything when fear of exposure hung over them like a loaded trap. Lyra grabbed his arm. "Evan, they're not leaving." Above them, the intruder spoke in low, hushed voices, too muffled to decipher, yet sharp enough to convey intention. A chair scraped. Something heavy was pushed aside. Evan realized with cold certainty that they were dismantling the house piece by piece. A floorboard groaned intensely, as if someone placed their full weight on it. "They're searching for a basement entrance," Evan whispered. Lyra's fingers dug into his sleeve. What if they find it? He swallowed hard. Then we do what we must. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. His father's old hunting rifle, its metal cold and stiff from neglect, rested between them. Evan hated guns. He hated what they meant, what they represented. But right now, principles were luxuries he could not afford. The footsteps shifted again. Then silence. That silence was worse than the noise, like the air holding its breath in anticipation of something breaking. Evan held Lyra close, feeling her trembling through his own shaking limbs. The thought of these men dragging her away, of her vanishing like his sister had years ago, ignited something fierce inside him. No more, he whispered silently. Never again. He tightened his grip on the rifle. If the hatch opened, he would not hesitate. Minutes stretched into a torturous eternity. Then, a sharp knock on the hatch. Lyra gasped, covering her mouth with both hands. Evan froze, muscles locked, heart pounding so hard he feared it might echo through the wood. Another knock, softer this time, followed by a calm voice. "Mr. Darrow, we know you're down there." His full name. Lyra stared at him, panic flooding her eyes. "How do they?" Evan shook his head, jaw clenched. The voice continued, smooth as oil. "We have no interest in harming you." The girl, however, has put herself in a compromising position. You're harboring a liability. A pause. Then, open the hatch. Let's handle this quietly. Evan's breath felt razor thin. Every instinct screamed that opening the hatch meant death. For one of them, maybe both. He stayed silent. The voice exhaled as though disappointed. "Evan, you're making choices you cannot undo." The footsteps retreated, but only slightly. Someone else approached. A faint beep, then the whir of a device against the floor. Lyra's eyes widened. "Are they?" It sounds like a scanner. Evan's blood ran cold. They were using technology he didn't understand, prepared for possibilities he never imagined. The hatch trembled slightly, as though responding. And then, without warning, the front door upstairs slammed open. Boots thundered across the floor above them. But these steps were different. Faster, heavier, purposeful. A man shouted, "Federal warrant. Hands where I can see them." Another voice barked orders. Chaos erupted overhead. Scraping chairs, shuffling boots, curses shouted through gritted teeth. Evan and Lyra looked at each other, stunned. Lyra whispered, How did they find us?" Evan didn't have an answer. But then he remembered. The injured guard she'd mentioned. The one who argued. The one who left the container unlatched. Not all monsters serve the same master. Maybe someone had tipped off the right people. Maybe conscience still existed in small, trembling pockets. The struggle intensified above. Thuds, grunts, the sound of bodies hitting walls. Then a single gunshot shattered the air, so loud the whole cellar seemed to vibrate. Lyra flinched violently. Evan held her, bracing himself for whatever came next. Seconds later, a voice shouted, "Basement hatch located. Proceed carefully." Evan lifted shaking hands toward the ceiling, hoping, praying, that whoever opened the hatch would not be another wolf wearing a badge as a costume. The latch turned. Light spilled downward. A uniformed officer peered in. "You too," he said gently. "You're safe now. Safe." The word landed like a miracle neither of them dared trust yet. When they were helped up into the ruined living room, the intruders lay cuffed and furious, faces pressed into the floorboards. Agents swarmed the property, gathering evidence, securing vehicles, calling in teams. Lyra stood unsteadily, wrapped in a blanket someone placed around her shoulders. One of the agents knelt beside her. "You were brave," he said. "Your testimony will bring down more than just these men." Lyra's eyes glistened, not with fear now, but with something gentler, fragile yet growing. Hope. Evan rested a hand on her shoulder. For the first time in years, he felt the pull of purpose return to him, threading warmth into the cold places he'd learned to ignore. Later, as dawn painted the sky in soft gold, an agent approached Evan. "You didn't have to protect her," he said. "Most wouldn't have." Evan looked toward Lyra, who was staring at the horizon like someone who'd finally been handed her future back. Someone once told me, Evan replied quietly, that kindness is the only thing powerful men can't control. The agent nodded. The sun broke over the fields. If this story moved you, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us keep telling stories that remind us why kindness still matters.